Hi and welcome back to So Pretty by Gift. Today I'll be showing you how to make this stunning Ankara ball gown with gathered skirt and layered net ruffles on the sleeves. We'll be using simple techniques and I will take you through each step from cutting, stitching, gathering to finishing. So even if you're a beginner, you can follow along and sew this dress beautifully. So grab your fabric, thread your needle and let's get started. I'm making this ball gown for a child who is almost 2 years old, and here are the measurements I used. They are also listed on the screen for clarity. I used full length of 24 inches, shoulder to waistline of 9.5 inches, chest circumference 23 inches, waist circumference 23 inches, shoulder width 9 inches. Please note, this baby is much taller and chubbier than most children of her age, so I want to recommend using these exact measurements for a typical 2-year-old. Always take accurate body measurements from your clients to avoid sizing issues. For this gown, I used 2.5 yards of Ankara fabric, 2 yards of cotton lining, 2 yards of net fabric for the sleeve ruffles, 5 yards of sequence bias in a matching color, an applique for the waistline, and of course thread and a zipper. If you want the skirt to be more voluminous, you can also add soft net underneath, but for this particular dress I didn't add any net to the skirt part, just Ankara and cotton lining. Now to begin the process, I will first cut my lining before transferring the pattern to the fashion fabric. I've already gone ahead to cut out my lining for the upper bodice. There is no special trick to this. Just make sure the length of your cut is more than the shoulder to waistline measurement with at least 3 extra inches. For the width, each layer should also have 3 extra inches after folding into 4 layers. For the back piece, I added 1 inch extra for zipper allowance. That's the vertical line you are seeing already ruled on the fabric. Remember, the back piece will be cut into 2 pieces. Now, I will fold my front piece into 2, then place the folded edge exactly on my zipper allowance line. I will pin both pieces together to keep them steady. I will begin by making a starting line at the top. This will guide all my vertical measurements, and I will be taking all my horizontal measurements from the zipper allowance line. I hope that part is clear. Now, from my starting line, I will place my measuring tape and mark 2 inches for the neck width. Then on the zipper allowance line, I came down by 2 inches for the neck depth. I want the back neckline to be wide, so I'm using the same neck depth as the front neckline. After marking the neck width and the neck depth, I connected both points with a gentle curve to form the neckline. Next, on my starting line, I measured 5 inches from the zipper allowance line. That 5 inches is half of my shoulder measurement plus an extra half inch for seam allowance. On that 5 inch point, I came down by half an inch to create the shoulder slope, and then I connected it with a slanted line to the neck width point. To find the chest line, I divided my shoulder measurement by 2. That gave me 4.5 inches, which I marked downward from the shoulder slope. Then on that chest line, I marked the same 5 inches that I used on the shoulder line and connected those points with a straight line. Now I will place my tape on the starting line and mark 10 inches downward for my shoulder to waistline measurement. That is 9.5 inches for the body and half an inch for the seam allowance that I will use to join it to the skirt part. On my chest line, I marked quarter of my chest measurement of 5.75 inches, which is my chest circumference divided by 4. Since the waistline measurement is the same as the chest line, I marked 5.75 inches again on the waistline. I connected both points with a straight vertical line. Then I added 2 inches of allowance to both the chest line and waistline measurement and connected the allowance point with a straight line as well. To shape the armhole curve, I placed my tape from the 1/2 inch shoulder slope point down to the chest line. Then I folded the tape in half to find the midpoint. On that midpoint, I came in by 0.5 inch and connected it with a smooth curve to the actual chest measurement, not the allowance line. This helps the armhole to fit better and lay nicely when stitched. Now the next step is optional, but I would recommend it. I extended the shoulder slope line to give myself more space to attach the ruffles comfortably. I marked 1 inch and I reconnected it back to the armhole curve. This little adjustment creates a neater space for your ruffles. Finally, I added 1/2 inch seam allowance on the shoulder line and cut it out carefully, following all the lines. I only added seam allowance on the shoulder line because if you remember, while drafting earlier, we already added allowances on all other areas except the shoulder line. After cutting out the bodice, I separated the back piece from the front. Then I went ahead to extend the back neck depth by 1 inch just to make it a bit deeper. I reconnected that point to the neck width to complete the neckline shape. And with that, we are done drafting the upper bodice. Now, I'll be using this lining piece as a guide to cut my Ankara fabric, which I've already ironed and pressed with light pepper stay for support. When cutting, I will follow the lining shape exactly. I won't be adding any extra allowance since it's already included. But for the back piece of the Ankara fabric, I'm making one small adjustment to help the zipper area lay flat. I came up by 1/2 an inch at the waistline, right at the zipper allowance side. Then I connected that point slightly down to the side seam. This helps eliminate any puffiness or bulge at the zipper area when you sew it. After doing that on the fabric, I placed it back on the lining and repeated the same adjustment on the back lining piece as well, since both were still together. Then I notched the zipper allowance to guide me doing stitching. And that's it, we are done with cutting the upper bodies. Then I will stitch them on the shoulder, lining to lining and Ankara to Ankara, right side facing each other. Now let's move on to the skirt part. I already have 2 skirt pieces cut out and each one is 16 inches in length. Remember, we are working with a total dress length of 24 inches. So to calculate the skirt length, I simply subtracted the 9.5 inches used for the upper bodice from the full length. That gave me 14.5 inches and then I added 1.5 extra inches. 1/2 an inch will be used to attach it to the upper bodice, 1 inch will be used to fold and hem the bottom. I hope that explanation is clear. For the width, I used 2.5 yards for each skirt piece. So when stitched together, I will have a total of 5 yards in width, which will give the dress a lovely full look. After joining both skirt pieces at one edge, I will go ahead and hem the bottom part. Next, I took my tape and measured 5 inches downward from the top edge. That's the part that will be attached to the bodice, not the hemline. I started pinning the bias tape from the edge, going around the skirt to the other side, just the way you see me do on the screen. I measured 5 inches down and pinned, then repeated the process across the entire width of the skirt. Please note, it doesn't have to be exactly 5 inches for every dress size. The important thing is that your bias tape is not placed directly at the center of the skirt. The top section should look slightly smaller than the bottom part near the hem. This gives the gown a more balanced look. After pinning, I will top stitch, then gather the waistline. For the lining skirt, I cut each piece to a length of 14 inches, which is 2 inches shorter than the Ankara fabric. This helps the Ankara fabric sit nicely over the lining without the lining peeking out underneath. For the width, I used the full length of my lining fabric, which is about 58 inches wide. I cut out 3 pieces of this same size and joined them together, leaving the last edge open. Once I joined, I hemmed the bottom and then gathered the waistline using my hand needle and thread. I will also be gathering the Ankara fabric the same way. Now let's go back to the upper bodice. I've already joined the main fabric and the lining together at the shoulders using the half-inch seam allowance we added while drafting. I joined lining to lining and Ankara to Ankara. Next, I placed the lining neckline directly on the Ankara neckline, pin them together and stitch around the neckline, but only from one end of the zipper allowance to the other. I then stitch around the full neckline, just between the notched zipper allowance points. You can use your notches as a guide for where to start and stop. After that, I also stitched around the armholes, since I won't be attaching any sleeves to this dress. And once that is done, I set the bodice aside for now. Now let's return to the skirt gathers. I've finished gathering the Ankara skirt waistline, and as you can see, I started gathering after 1 inch from the edge, and I also stopped 1 inch before the other edge. So I left 1 inch on both sides free. This is important for attaching the zipper later on. Those edges should not be pleated so that the zipper will sit flat and relaxed when we sew it in. Also, you will notice that the gathered waistline is now much wider than the actual waist circumference we are working with, which is 23 inches. This is perfectly normal after gathering fabric. To adjust for this, I will add 2 inches for zipper allowance to the 23 inches, giving me a total of 25 inches. Now, to make the skirt waistline match the 25 inches total, I will start by checking for areas on the skirt where the gathers are less tight. I will gently pleat those parts, pin them down and keep checking. So I will pleat, pin and measure gradually, focusing on the lightly gathered sections. This way, the gathers will look more even and balanced, and the waistline will reduce neatly to the size we need. I will keep doing this slowly and carefully until I get the perfect 25 inches needed to match the upper bodice. Then I will go and run a stitch on the waistline to make everything firm. I will now repeat the same gathering process on my lining piece, just the way I did on the Ankara fabric. If after gathering both the main fabric and the lining, you feel like the skirt still doesn't have enough volume, you can go ahead and add some soft net. Just cut the net, gather it using the same process, and attach it directly to the Ankara waistline. This will give your gown more fullness. Now let's move on to the ruffles for the sleeves. I used 2 yards of net and I divided it into 1 yard per sleeve. I've also taken the time to iron the net neatly so it's easier to work with. To cut it out, I first folded the length into 2 and ironed it flat to relax the fabric. Then I folded the width into 2, and afterward I folded the rest into 3, just as you see me doing on the screen. If my explanations sound a bit tricky, don't worry. Simply watch what I'm doing in the video and it will become much clearer. After folding, I trimmed off any uneven edges to make everything neat and even, and then I cut out the strips carefully. With this method, I was able to get 6 inches wide strip for each sleeve ruffle. Next, I joined the strips together and pleated them in the center using my sewing machine. I repeated the exact same step for the other 1 yard piece of net. So now I have 2 separate gathered ruffle strips, one for each sleeve. Back to the bodice. I'm now done stitching around the neckline and armholes. So next I'm going to notch both the neckline and the armholes. This will help the curve sit smoothly when turned. Now it's time to turn the bodice inside out. To do this, I gently put my hand between the lining and main fabric of the front piece through the shoulder opening. Then, with the help of my other hand, I took the back piece and pulled it through the shoulder into the front side. You can take your time with this step. Then I will repeat the same process on the other shoulder. Once both sides are turned, it gives a neat and beautiful finish on the inside. Finally, I will go ahead and iron everything down to relax the seams and curves. On the side seam allowance of both my front and back bodice pieces, I measured and marked the 2 inches seam allowance we added while drafting, plus an extra 1 inch, making it 3 inches in total. This mark helps me know where to start attaching the ruffles, and the extra 1 inch makes it easier to stitch the side seam later. You can even use 1.5 inches extra if you want more space to work with. From that 3 inch mark on one side, I measured 1 inch around the armhole, ending at the other 3 inch mark on the opposite side. This will be my guide for placing the ruffles. Now, I took the edge of my gathered net ruffle, folded it in neatly, and placed it right on the 1 inch guide I just marked. Then I started pinning the ruffles down, starting from one 3 inch seam mark to the other, pinning exactly along the 1 inch line around the armhole. After pinning the first layer, I added the second ruffle just inside the first one, placing it slightly higher than where the first ruffle started. I pin it all the way across as well. Then finally, I pinned a third ruffle right on the edge of the armhole, giving the sleeve a full layered look. So in total, I now have 3 ruffle layers on one sleeve. I will repeat this same process on the other shoulder using the second set of gathered nets we prepared earlier. Remember, we gathered each net piece separately, one for each sleeve. Once everything is pinned in place, I will go ahead and top stitch the ruffle down on my sewing machine. I hope you are following along easily. If you are enjoying this tutorial so far, please subscribe to this channel. Give this video a like and drop a comment below. I would love to hear from you. And here is it after stitching, already looking very beautiful. At this point, feel free to trim off any excess net to make the ruffle edges even and neat. I also top stitch on the first layer of my ruffles. This helps the ruffle stand up nicely instead of relaxing flat against the neckline. That way, it won't fall on the child's face or cover the neckline completely. For the belt, I used 2 strips measuring 4 inches in width and 22 inches in length. I folded it into 2, stitch along the open side with a 1/4 inch seam allowance and stitch one end closed while leaving the other end open. From the stitch edge, I inserted my scissors carefully to help turn it inside out. Once it was turned, I ironed it flat to keep it neat. Then I pinned the belt to the side seam of the front bodice, placing it 1 inch above the waistline. This position gives a nice balance to the design. Next, I stitched the side of the bodice, attaching main fabric to main fabric and lining to lining on both sides. Please take your time with this part. Don't be in a rush because the previous stitches on the ruffles, especially around the armhole area, might make it slightly tricky to sew, but with careful stitching you will get it done neatly. After stitching, I ironed the seam lines open on both sides. Now for the skirt attachment, I notched the midpoint of the gathered skirt and also notched the midpoint of the upper bodice. Then with right side facing each other, I pinned the 2 points together. From there I continued pinning the skirt to the bodice all the way until I reached the zipper allowance on both sides. After that, I stitched them together neatly. I repeated the same process on the lining piece, joining this lining skirt to the bodice lining the exact same way. Our dress is already coming out very neat and beautiful. Both the front and the back are looking well shaped. Now let's add the applique. I pinned it only to the Ankara side of the dress, not the lining. So before stitching, make sure to separate the lining from the Ankara fabric to avoid sewing them together. If your applique isn't machine sewable, you can tack it by hand before adding the zipper. Now on the zipper allowance, I measured 4 inches downward from the waistline and stitched down to the hemline on both the Ankara and lining fabric. Then I pinned the zipper in place, starting with the Ankara side, and stitch it down neatly. After that, I pinned and stitched it on the lining as well, which helped finish the neckline neatly. And just like that, our beautiful ball gown is ready with clean finishing. I hope you enjoyed sewing along with me. If you found this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up, leave a kind comment, and don't forget to subscribe for more beautiful sewing projects. Thanks for watching and see you in my next video.